We all want it, right? And success can mean and be measured by so many different meanings, which, by the way, and you will probably hear me say this often, you want to always check in with your particular definition of success in whatever season you're in, because it will and should change as you evolve. And the worst is chasing a definition of success that no longer matches what you want or who you're becoming. But that's not what this episode is about. It's about the fact that you can be wildly successful, be incredibly wealthy, and still be operating in survival mode. I think that a lot of folks don't equate the two, but rather think that once you've made it, whatever that means, you've, well, made it, right? You're not surviving, you're thriving simply because you're successful. And that's not quite how things work. So, what do I mean when I talk about being in survival mode? You might have heard this before, folks using this phrase, and maybe have wondered, well, what exactly does that mean? And listen, stick with me here for a bit as I get a little technical, put my little nerd hat on, which I love, because I really want you to pick up what I'm putting down here. And so, during times of crisis, chaos, or high stress, we enter survival mode and our brains and our bodies begin to function a little differently because it's trying to survive, right? It's perceived a particular threat or danger. And a little caveat here that these experiences can be like real life threats or perceived threats to our safety, which I'll talk about a little bit more about in a second. Our brain doesn't always know how to differentiate between the two. It just reacts. And its number one priority is to make sure that you're safe and it's your survival. We have a thinking brain, right? It's prefrontal cortex. And that is a part of our brain that does all the thinking, logical things, right? Problem solving, organization, emotional regulation, critical thinking, decision making, right? Our thinking brain is able to take in information from a particular situation, synthesize it, get the data, and then it can produce, right? Help you with a well thought out response or action, right? It helps you react in a way that is according to the information that's in front of you, right? And then there's our survival or lizard brain, which is responsible for, well, surviving, right? Above all, as I mentioned before. And so when we experience a threat to our safety or our survival, or there's any trauma, which I like to think of or explain as too much too fast, that part of our brain then like switches on. And our thinking brain, right, the one that's responsible for or all of the logical things, decision making, critical thinking, it begins to dim, right? Because it begins to dim, we literally cannot access the tools, the skills, the ability to think critically and effectively, right? Our survival brain only cares about one thing and one thing only, and that's maintaining our self preservation, right? Making sure that we're good. And so there's this heightened sense of urgency because there's a perceived danger, and using our thinking brain would just take up too much time to process that information, and our safety could be compromised, right? So that's just to like share a little bit about, right, like our brains, kind of how they function, and kind of what happens, right, when there is perceived danger. Okay, and this is not a like neurobiology episode or course or anything like that. Like I'm really kind of synthesizing things here, so that I can get to my point, which is you can be successful and still be operating in survival mode. Now, our brains and bodies are smart, right? When it perceives danger or a trigger, right, it will activate to protect itself and survive. And there are typically one of four ways that it will react. And you probably heard this before. You'll go into fight mode, flight mode, freeze mode, or fawn, right? I'm just going to go to them pretty quickly here. Fight mode is you go towards the perceived threat head on, right? You think that there's a chance to win, so you go towards it. There's flight. right? That is when you do the opposite. You run away from whatever you perceive to be dangerous, right? You feel like there's a chance that you can escape the danger, so you go ahead and you flee, right? Then it's freeze, and that's when you're unable to move or act against the threat, and you feel like nothing can protect you, so you literally just do nothing. And then there's fawn, right? And that is when you try to manage the conflict by people pleasing, right? By keeping the peace. You've probably, have done this yourself or have seen other people do it, right? It's like, I don't want any trouble. How can I make this go away? Let me just give you what you want, right? That's kind of the thinking behind fawn. Notice that I haven't said anything about accomplishments, success, wealth, or anything like that. Why? Because this is how our brains operate, regardless of what our last name is, the number of degrees we have, or how many zeros are in our bank accounts. This is why you can be wildly successful and still be operating in survival mode. In fact, for folks of color, I think that this is something that we really, really, really need to work on and be mindful of, because chances are that because of our intersectional identities, we have had to be in survival mode at one point or another in our lives. And when we become very successful and aren't really mindful of this, this is where we can sabotage our success or spend all of our money without necessarily being intentional and mindful on about it. But that can be a separate episode. Anywho, as I mentioned, you can be wildly successful and still be operating on survival mode. I mean, think about the Real Housewives franchise or any of the reality shows that you may watch, or maybe I watch, because I definitely do watch reality shows sometimes. But if you think about these shows that have a lot of drama or a lot of fighting, we can talk about how sometimes these shows are scripted, and all of that. But some of the reactions are real, and you can tell that they're actually responding to a trigger. For successful women of color entrepreneurs, I want to share two ways that I see this survival mode kind of in action. And it does not look like the highly reactive behavior that we might see on TV on a reality show, but it's still survival mode. It can look many different ways and still be the same thing. One is going nonstop, the hustling, right? This idea that I have to keep going or else something is going to happen to me. And if you're listening to this, you might think, I don't necessarily think about it that way, or my hustle or my desire to keep going nonstop is not necessarily because I think something's going to happen to me. I hear you. And I don't have to know who you are or know your business to know that that's probably what's underneath. That's the reason why we hustle. That's the reason why we go nonstop in those very like highly urgent ways, right? It's a form of fight response that you're pushing up against this feeling or this thinking that there is a threat, right? Like something feels dangerous here. I have to keep going. I have to keep building. I have to make more money, or else I am going to be in danger of paying my bills or in danger of something else, right? And again, that could be tied to something that might have happened to you in the past. If we drill down to like one more layer, I've seen this happen with entrepreneurs where, they're burnt out, their schedules are just nuts, and they work really hard to finally make space on their calendars and build time capacity. And what do? After they make that space, right? They create that space, they start to fill it back in, because having that expansion feels so uncomfortable that it almost feels threatening, right? You begin to think that if you're not always busy, if you're not always doing something, if you're not always building, you're going to be in danger, right? I know that that definitely was the case for me, right? Where I built two businesses at the same time, which in hindsight, I would not recommend. But it was because, right, just as I was creating capacity in one business, I saw an opportunity to start another, because I had this really underdeveloped relationship to peace, right? Sure, the opportunity was there, but I didn't have to take it. And I definitely did not have to take it at the time that I took it. But, and I didn't have this awareness then, but I didn't have a settled nervous system, right? I thought that I needed more. I thought that I needed more money, right? Like having more than one business meant that I was going to make more money. And I thought that if I made more money, then I, would feel safe. I did not have a settled nervous system. I did not have I didn't feel safe enough with peace or with just space to really stop and identify what was the danger, right? I just kept running and sprinting really because I thought that I was unsafe. And I later came to realize that there was really nothing coming for me anymore. I was actually safe, right? Like I had built safety for myself. But again, because I was running, because I was going, I did not have the space to pause. I just kept going. Right. And I see this often. And chances are that if you are a woman of color entrepreneur and you're listening to this, either you might find yourself kind of in this story, right? Maybe it doesn't look the same, but it's this idea that I have to keep going or else. And I really want to invite you to think about, well, or else what? And is that true? But we'll talk about that in a second. The other way that I see this kind of this survival mode playing out for women of color entrepreneurs is in this appeasing to avoid conflict, right? This idea that, there's something here that feels threatening, but if I appease it, right? Like if I just try to keep the peace, then it becomes a little bit more manageable for me. And I see this when entrepreneurs have clients, right? Or when entrepreneurs have a team, right? It's this acting out of survival mode. If it's still not super obvious why this is a problem, right? Outside of, it does take a toll on your health, is that, when you find yourself constantly reacting, right? Constantly in survival mode, then you find yourself not doing the things that you really want. And it's counterproductive to your goals. And when that happens, right, you end up feeling frustrated and stuck and like, well, why is this happening? I'm going towards these things. It could be that you're not giving yourself the proper tools to actually go towards what you want. You might be wondering, well, dang, like, where does this come from? Like, pretty smart. Like, why do we do this? And there are a couple of different places why, as women of color entrepreneurs, we might be constantly in survival mode. And one is just society, right? Like the society that we live in as women of color, for us, it can really truly be about survival. We live in a country and in a world where our bodies and our identity as women is believed to be less valuable. That threat is real, right? Then there's our families of origin. People pleasers usually start out as parent pleasers. People who hustle, and have that like really high drive that is typically modeled for them, or the opposite has been modeled for them. And so going hard in and hustling is a way to kind of not repeat what you saw growing up. And then there's, previous traumas, right? Our bodies might be working with outdated information. If you haven't necessarily processed or really been with, these past situations or circumstances where you were under a threat or in danger, then your body might be working with outdated information. The last thing I'll say here before I share some strategies is this. You might be thinking, well, Josie, I have to secure this bag, right? Like my family, my legacy are depending on it. Yes, 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 yes. Please secure all of the bags with your name on it. What I want you to take into account and why you must move away from being in this survival state is that being in survival mode creates a lot of activation and urgency that sometimes isn't necessarily warranted, nor is it helpful, right? You can be focused without being hurried. I'm going to say that again because I really need you to understand this. You can be focused on a goal and crush that goal without being hurried. They don't need to exist at the same time, nor is urgency and being hurried required to be wildly successful. It's that urgency that keeps you in this perpetually activated state And that will impact your health and well being. That is a guarantee. It's not about if, it's about when. And if you think about it that way, there really is no point in working this hard to break intergenerational patterns and create the legacy that you want to create if you have to compromise your health and wellness in the process. That urgency comes from your survival brain. And as I mentioned before, it's what kind of keeps you frustrated and stuck because you literally cannot access the part of your brain that can help you think critically and problem solve, right? So you might actually miss certain things as you're working really hard to meet your goals and create the legacy that you want to create. That perpetual urgency is very different than, you being in a particular season that has a start and end date, right? Where I need to be laser focused, in this particular season, this is what's required. That's very different than, being perpetually activated, perpetually, with this urgency and being in this survival mode. That is unsustainable. Let's talk strategies. Okay. How do you actually move away from being in this survival state and mode? One, awareness. Nothing happens without awareness. Okay. You cannot switch out of survival mode unless you know what that actually feels and sounds like for you in your body. And your body is a really, really good indicator, but perhaps you're working on being more connected to your body. Okay. If that's the case for you, pay attention to your inner dialogue. Right. When you're going towards something in your business, or if you're doing the opposite, you're resisting or shying away from something in your business, you want to ask yourself, why am I doing this? Right? What is happening here? Why am I going towards this? Why am I moving away from this thing? For either of these to work, whether that is tapping into your body or observing your inner dialogue, you have to prioritize intentional pause. That doesn't mean that you have to stop what you're doing and, spend an entire day or days or weeks or whatever, thinking or reflecting, even though I don't know about y'all, but for me, that is a dream. Thinking time is one of my favorite things to do. You don't have to do that, right? But you do have to prioritize just an intentional pause. And that can be, and my recommendation is that it's a ritual, becomes a practice, something that you do, that you have a habit of, right? And that can look like a morning or an evening practice. That can look like journaling, which if you've been listening to this podcast now, you know that I'm a really big fan. It could be morning pages, like whatever it looks like for you, just make sure that you are prioritizing a pause or intentionally pausing. Second thing is soothe and test. If you find yourself in activation, right? You've built that awareness, you're like, oof, hold on. I'm activated right now. I feel like I'm in survival mode. Take a beat, go for a walk, put the phone down, do some breathing exercises, dance, twerk, do jumping jacks, like whatever is going to work for you. You just want to make sure that you are pausing and you're moving away, if you can, from the thing or the person that has just activated you. Okay. Something in you, right? Like when you find yourself activated, something in you believes that you are in danger. Okay, so you need to take care of yourself first. You literally cannot do anything. You cannot, again, you cannot think critically. You cannot problem solve if you think you're in danger. You have to make sure that you're taking care of yourself first. Once you feel more grounded, right, and you've taken the walk or you've had a little twerk session, you want to think back to the thing, the person, the situation that had just activated you and want to assess, what about the situation? What about this thing actually feels threatening or dangerous? Okay, that is going to build your awareness and it's going to help you test whether, there is actually a threat that you need to protect yourself from. And sometimes it is, and sometimes it's not, right? But it's going to help you fight when you need to fight and not when it's not required. Like we want to really move away from constantly being activated in this survival mode, protecting yourself. That takes a toll on your body. Okay. And then the third strategy that I want to talk to you about and just invite you to think about is actually working with someone, right? Really going towards additional support, whether that is working with someone one on one or being in a group container that can really support this, is can be incredibly, incredibly helpful in teaching you how to actually switch your body out of survival mode. Okay. Why? Because when you can actually learn to take care of yourself in this way, you can actually make decisions and behave in the ways that match what you actually desire. I don't know about you, but one of the most frustrating things is, knowing what you want, knowing, what legacy you want to build, and then finding yourself behaving in ways and making decisions that don't match that, and kind of beating, your head against the wall. Like, well, why am I doing this? Sometimes it's that you actually need to teach your body and your brain how to behave differently, right? You have to teach your body that you're actually safe and switch it out of survival mode. All right, y'all. I hope this has been helpful. I'll see y'all next week.